Welcome. This is the Drupal usability meeting for October 13th, 2023. For superstitious people, bad things are likely to happen on Friday the 13th, but we'll see. I'm Benji Fisher moderating, and also present are Aaron McHale, who's sharing his screen and will start off the conversation, Anmol Goel, Ralph Kohler, Simo Helston, and Thomas Howell. Go ahead, Aaron.
Thanks, Benji. So the issue we're looking at is 3347291, combined field storage and field instance forms. This issue was actually recently committed by scroll down. Yeah, so it was committed back on the 7th of October. So about a week ago. This is the first the issue came up in the usability channel in Slack and recently, and we just this kind of the first time we're talking about it. Basically, the best way to demonstrate is to just open a screenshot here. So the issue essentially combines what was previously two separate forms, the field configuration form and the field storage configuration form, into a single form. And you can see an example. This is a body field, and there was previously a separate field storage tab here, but now there's a field set here with the number of allowed values in here inside this field set. The main the main concern I have with this is that the things inside this field set impact all instances of this field, whereas everything else in this form only affects the individual instance. So if you have the body field and you reuse it across like 3 content types, if you change, for instance, the allow text formats, that applies, I believe, to the instance of the field. Whereas if you change, you probably can't once it has a value. If you change how many the allowed number of values, that impacts every instance of the field. And the fact that those two, so we generally in these meetings we recommend that one form doesn't do more than one thing, and particularly when it comes to like the impact of those changes. So the fact that we previously had 2 forms, which could be confusing to some users in terms of what the differences are, I think actually that bringing them all into one form makes this problem worse, because now it's less clear which changes, I suppose, impact every field and which changes impact just the instance. I guess it's the sort of mitigation is this field set, but I think it's not ideal, because especially if you're making a change and then you go to export the config, those are at 2 separate config objects. So yes, so that my main concern is just around the fact that we now have one form that has fields that are impact at the scope of those changes is different. And so yeah, I'd be keen to hear what other people think.
Go ahead, Ralph.
At first, a big +1 to everything Aaron said. And in addition to that, just from a cognitive point of view, that single form is just overwhelming now. And I have issues separating the different concepts, basically label, help text, all the things that previously were on the edit tab are now interrupted by the field storage. It's also so to get a sort of coherent flow and structure in my own mental model is challenging that way. So there's additional problematic. But yeah, Aaron's points are even more significant.
So you find the form to be more kind of overwhelming because
Yeah, it's
just
not really structured because you have just a few field sets and a few fields, a few checkboxes, and it's to get
yeah,
some sense into it. It's challenging and it makes
yeah,
me think. So that's an additional detail on top of yours.
right. And we do try to recommend that one like one form doesn't do too many things, that we try to say, okay, don't have a massive form with lots of options on it with
Yep.
so
Go ahead, Simo. Simo, you're unmuted, but I don't hear anything from you.
How about now?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, having bad connector with the headphones. So I'd like to see how this works with a form with a field that has a preset list of text options or preset like different kind of preset options, so that like for instance, if you add some texts that are allowed values, and then when you set default value for the field, so does it update the list of default values available if it's of the same form, or does it kind of do you have to save it before you can select a default? So let's say you have a list of cat, dog, horse as text, and then you add a cow, and then you want to set the cow string cow text as default. So how would it work with this form?
I've pasted into the Zoom chat a link to a live site where we can test it, and I see that Aaron already noticed and is open
I
to
was
that.
hoping you were about to. I was hoping that that little bubble next to the chat meant that a site was there. So yeah, that's a really good point. I want to see now what happens when we add. So let's create a field.
And of course, anyone else can use that link too.
I'm just gonna call it test. And what am I looking for? Select list, probably. List text. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, this takes you to the form. Basically, we have allowed values. So if we add say cat, dog, I do like this. This is an to be fair, this is an improvement over previously, where it was just a free text field. And then set default value is okay, so it is actually, so that's interesting. Okay, so you can see that these values I've added in, it did something behind the scenes. So like these are now, so if I add another one, oh, what's another pet? Cat, dog, fish. Let's go
Hamster.
with fish or hamster. We go hamster. Does fish appear? Okay, fish does actually appear here. Let's just save it and see what happens on the edit form.
Slow down a second, Aaron. Simo, is that the experiment you wanted to do?
Yeah. So because that's changed actually a lot, adding those values, because it used to be a kind of a text field where you, or text area where you add those.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
allowed values. That's also, yeah, that's actually quite different from what I'm used to seeing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so go ahead and save
yeah.
So yeah, so this is like inside the field storage. So if you then change this, does it change? I guess that wouldn't. Okay, so it is impacting the sort of default selection. So it is updating that. What I think we could do is maybe we can probably demonstrate the original concern I had as well, because if I go, so I've added this test field to the basic page content type. If I come back to, if I go into article, I can reuse that field. And I can add that. So I'm wondering if okay, so if I add help text into this one. Oh, this is a test. I'm going to save that. And I come back to content types and go to basic page. And I edit test. Yes, that help text was not saved across all instances. So this is kind of the problem I was talking about before, where now we basically have a form that, whereas before these were two separate forms, so it was really, you could have a clear distinction between one of them being the field instance, the other one being like all instances. Whereas now we're in a situation where some of the fields apply to a single instance and some of the fields apply to across all of the instances, which is really not great. It's a really not a good pattern.
And maybe also something that's can be if you rearrange the options. That's probably also all the all the instances.
Yeah, like if I think, okay, I'm on. Yeah, and I guess so. There's a description here. These settings apply to test field everywhere is used. Some also impact the way data is stored and cannot be changed once the data has been created. So there is this description, but I'm not sure like how. I don't think that makes it like as I don't think it's equivalent to having these as two separate forms.
Yeah, also the field set has a thin gray border around it, which you might not notice at all, Aaron, because I know you have
Right. Yeah, it could be
some
really
vision
easy to
problems.
miss. I suppose there is the indenting, which is slightly more obvious, but it's not. Yeah, if you're quickly scanning through, like if you're using keyboard navigation, like the next thing you tab, the next thing you jump to is the select list. So for somebody who's just navigating using keyboard navigation, they're going to completely miss that information up here, and they will just jump through the field set. And like now, so like for somebody who's using only keyboard navigation, this is not good at all. But yeah, if we like reorder this, for instance, and I save this, and then I come back to article.
And the indentation becomes less and less useful for distinguishing the sections of the form.
Right.
As the form gets more and more complicated, as
Yeah.
you add more options to the allowed values. Thomas has been waiting for a while to say something. Go ahead, Thomas.
Thank you. I forget my original point, but everything that was talked was awesome. I agree 99%. Initially, I was on the fence as to whether or not this was a frustration. The way I would characterize or summarize what everyone said is we have essentially a global effect in the middle of a whole bunch of localized effects. And that isn't clear, and writing it up in a blob of text is not effective for communicating how this works. So to me, this is presenting an even bigger barrier to newer users. These things are pretty hard when you're new to Drupal in the first place to understand that once you we can say in words when we create content, then this form becomes fixed and we can't change it, but it's really hard to understand what that really means conceptually. And by mixing these forms, you make it even harder for someone to understand what's going on. And I don't understand. Oh, that was my original thing, is I don't understand what the motivation was for getting rid of that tab. Is it just they don't want to have a global and local tab? Like, why? I understand the rest of the changes, but I don't understand this specific change that's being implemented. Like, why is it? What's the motivation?
I think on the issue, the it says here that users across all skill levels have a hard time understanding the difference between different steps in the field creation process. Even experienced users reported they don't remember on which form the configuration they're looking for exists, and they usually find configuration by trial and error. Specific examples of two forms separated, creating usability issues like another issue 2924076 field config form for an entity reference field doesn't tell you what entity type it's referencing. And I guess that was done in the field UI 2023 user research, which is issue number 3343940.
Did they test this new, like, did they put stuff together in this way and then find that users were understanding it? Or are they just trying to solve a problem? They're assuming this fixes the problem.
As far as
I'm
I
not
can
sure.
tell, they have not done any follow-up user testing after implementing it. And they seem to be taking the position that the user research they've done, the user testing, the usability study, is enough to satisfy the core gate of usability and accessibility.
Okay, that's just, it's confusing. Like, I understand the identifying a problem with the user research, but it doesn't seem that the user research is sufficient to indicate that the proposed solution is a viable answer. And I think that's where we're kind of running up against it, is I'm not seeing this as making it any easier. Whereas I do understand that all of this stuff is problematic. So I feel like maybe this is the wrong solution to a valid problem.
And we're getting a thumbs up from Ralph. Ralph, you earlier raised your hand, but I guess you decided that you're just agreeing with what everyone else is saying.
No, I just wanted to add the detail about the usability studies, but Aaron already answered it, so I pulled back the raised hand.
Okay. So I guess we do sometimes commit an issue and then revert it. Usually for more technical reasons. I've never seen it done for usability reasons. But I guess we should continue the discussion on the fixed issue and advocate for undoing it. I guess one thing we should do at the same time is recommend other solutions for the specific problems that are cited in the issue summary. So for example, users have trouble remembering whether it's on this form or that form. That doesn't seem to me like such a big problem, since they are two tabs on the same page. It's easy to navigate from one to the other if you don't remember where it is. And we have to make the case that that's outweighed by the confusion of having the two forms combined. The fact that the current help text is not enough to make the distinction that we are doing two things on one form, which is an anti-pattern. Raised the point that the field set has accessibility problems for keyboard users. For those who have trouble distinguishing the light gray border, which, by the way, I think all of us have trouble seeing that in Aaron's Zoom window, and that's sort of a proxy for having limited visual acuity. So I think we have to continue the discussion on that issue and recommend that the committers undo the change they've made.
One thing also, maybe I'd like to state here that is sometimes confusing is that you can have the same field, kind of the same field, same name in different, what's it called? You can have the same one with nodes and with terms, and so that it's kind of the same, but they are not connected, except that the site builder might make them to be the same. But that's also another thing that could be confusing. So it's not always for user. It doesn't always look like some settings are global because the user has the same kind of same name field in taxonomy and in nodes. So then it's not global from the user's perspective because it's a different field, even if it has the same name. So
Right,
there is also another level.
I don't see how that's related to this issue, though.
Yeah, I think that when we say that, like with the global, something that affects globally, so it can be from user's perspective, there might be confusion if it's the same field or not the same field. But yeah,
Okay.
that's.
I think we should also raise the point that they seem to have skipped the step of validating their proposed solution against the original. Yes, you did user testing at the start of the process, but you don't seem to have done user testing at the end of the process. And to really make that point, we should go to the effort of suggesting the sorts of user tests that would show the problems that we've brought up. Ralph, go ahead.
One idea might be they could basically test all those issues that were committed at next week's DrupalCon on contribution day, for example, and then that way get direct feedback. Well, probably most of the people attending are more experienced users, but still there would be some valuable feedback that way.
Yeah, it's awfully short notice to be organizing usability testing at DrupalCon, but if that's possible, that would be a really good thing. And the organizers of user testing would have to include people who are skeptical of these changes, as well as people who are in favor of these changes, because it's really hard to come up with a user test that challenges a change that you're in favor of. Right, that's why developers have separate QA people testing their work rather than testing their own work. It's the same principle. Go ahead, Thomas.
I'm I'm very interested in how we can effectively make the point that we are concerned about, in addition to the need for kind of follow-up usability testing or validation testing, user acceptance testing. But in addition to that, just the fact that they didn't think to even bring it to this group or bring it to an accessibility group to see if such a significant change was going to introduce other problems. What's the best way that we can be seen as a positive advocate for, hey, folks, we understand the rapidity with which you want to get changes in, but this is a pretty big one, and making something that's already messy and complex, as shown in your own usability testing, like those are the most important times to be getting I guess expert opinion is not necessarily but at least the resident expert opinion, because the UX team ostensibly is providing some counterbalance, but how can we make certain that our concerns are heard in a way that this doesn't happen again in the future?
One thing that
Go ahead.
one thing, yeah.
You muted yourself, Simo.
Yeah, I was thinking that one thing that could help, but I don't know if they get used. It could be some kind of a checklist for, like, if you're changing a form, check that form does one thing, only one thing, and it only affects like kind of doesn't do local and global changes at the same time. That kind of some kind of a very simple checklist, so that developers could check. I'm editing or I'm changing a form. Can I check these boxes? It only does one thing. It doesn't do this. It does that. That kind of checklist. If we could introduce that, and if it would get used, then it would help. But I don't know if such things get used.
Yeah, we have user interface standards documented on Drupal.org. And I've thought we should maybe collectively look at expanding and updating them, because I don't know if they've had much attention over the last sort of several years. But that also illustrates the problem with just because they're there doesn't mean that people know they're there or know to reference them or to look at them. So I think there's a element of making sure, because I think this comes down to, like, if practically, like, core committers are the people who are responsible for committing something in. So they should all be ensuring that before they commit, that the relevant sign off has happened from the relevant core gates have been passed. And it seems that and again, I'm not wanting to imply anything malicious, but it feels like that isn't being done as strictly as it maybe could be, because of the example we're seeing here, where now we've got a committed issue which clearly has some problems that could have been picked up if it had been brought up to a meeting previously before being committed.
Right. Well, we did have a discussion with Larry. I think it was last week's meeting. And Aaron has suggested talking with him in person at DrupalCon if possible. But Larry is a core committer and he's the project manager for Drupal. So, if he wants to put a patch in, we don't have a mechanism to stop him. I think our best course of action is to try to get our opinions heard early, which at the moment means sort of anticipating the issues that are being worked on and reviewing them proactively rather than waiting for someone to tag them for usability review and ask for a review. Go ahead, Ralph.
But working proactively and following, in air quotes, everything is quite a demanding task. And I think it's overwhelming, sort of. And there are already many issues with needs usability review, and now also follow along initiatives and actions alongside becomes a full-time job, and everyone here is not paid for those contributions, and they work on their own time. And for example, the field UI team is dedicated team within Acquia actively working on, for example, the field UI, and they iterate fast. And to follow everything and also work proactively there, it's sort of hard to keep up that way. And I think even Glory is the core committer and has the last say that it's fine, but still the steps should be followed, meaning with a change in the UI, have a usability meeting and bring it up the issue that way, and that would be also so the team hasn't have to follow proactively and spend even more time. And yeah, and now reverting or fixing things, like for example the same with the add field UI, the new one, that's also issues, and same is here. So suboptimal, let's put it that way.
Right.
I think-
Go ahead, Thomas.
Well, Aaron can go first. It's all right.
Yeah, sorry, it's hard to know if anyone's raised their hand, but let me open the chat window. No, I just wanted to follow up a couple of points that I don't think anyone, I don't think Larry or any core committers were intentionally, I don't believe they would intentionally try to circumvent, like usability reviews or accessibility reviews, because I don't think that's part of our culture as a community. I think we're quite, for an open source project, I think we're actually quite good at, generally speaking, at these things. I just think it's sometimes with these things, it's easy to think, as was said earlier, that like, okay, we did usability testing, we did user research, great, we can do all these things, and that's fine if you have the conclusions there. So I don't think there was any bad intentions through that, but I think it's just making people aware that, and usually, and this could be a good example of something where actually we can use this as a learning opportunity to say, okay, in the future, this is a good example of why you might want to make sure, even if you've done user testing, you want to run these things past a group of people who can provide input. And then that's something that we can, maybe an in-person chat at DrupalCon is the easiest way to make sure that there's no, no miscommunication there. But yeah, I think that's probably the main thing I wanted to say on that.
Thomas, go ahead.
I agree with everything everyone has said, 100%. And in addition to that, I think that it's and I agree that it's certainly not intentional. I think that people who are working to meet deadlines or to produce changes on a particular timeline can sometimes rush things a little bit. And I think that this is an instance where it's important to note that if this group is ever slowing down the process, then that's a great time for feedback about how maybe we could change X, Y, or Z about what we're doing. But I'm pretty sure that's not the instance right now. Like if anyone on that team had come to us with this issue, it would have had conversation for a period of time. And ultimately, as like the project manager or whomever on that team wanted to override our recommendations, they certainly could. So I think it's important to note in any conversation with Lowry or anyone else that the gate is not intended to slow things down. It's actually intended to help avoid things getting into core that would actually make things less usable and just catch problems. It's not intended to slow down the process. And I think it's important to note it's not on our part either. We're not trying to be nitpicky or maintain territory. It's really just if this goes out and gets used, we anticipate that there's going to be issues, and we're trying to help avoid someone having to write additional issues in the future, et cetera, when this could have been caught during the actual software development life cycle of Drupal, in core specifically. Thank you.
Yeah, so what are our next steps for the particular issue of combining the two forms and the more general issue of getting back to the process of reviewing early rather than after things have been committed? What are the next steps?
I think it's worth us posting a comment on the fixed issue, I think.
Yes.
Equally, I'm happy to just sort of have an informal chat with Larry or others at DrupalCon to just highlight the concerns or issues that were raised, both in terms of this issue, but I think posting on the issue itself will address that. But just in general, in terms of like the approach that seems to be taken, I think I would have liked to have seen, I think I might raise this before, that I would have liked to have seen like the approach of an experimental module used, because that would have been a much safer way to experiment with these changes rather than on the field UI module that's enabled on hundreds of thousands of sites. And that way we could have, as we've done with other things in the past, like Project Browser and automatic updates, or we could review, they could get everything in, and then we could have a cohesive review of everything, right? And that's one way to not to mean the group isn't like, we don't have to review every single issue, and it's not slowing down like the process of things getting done, because if it's an experimental module, then it's okay. People can turn it on, turn it off, try it out. That's fine. So maybe that's something which should be done. Maybe that's an opportunity now to actually move some of these things into an experimental field UI module before 10.2 is released. But again, I think there's a conversation to have there.
Okay.
Yeah.
What
I don't know if module is, it kind of makes sense in Drupal context, but I was thinking that even to have a kind of a all this stuff, field stuff, if it would have been merged into one branch, that could be then merged into core. So it would be something that I don't know if Drupal has, but it kind of would be kind of a full feature change branch where it could be run and tested as such without putting it all in core one by one.
Yeah, you could have like a one issue that tracks all these changes and has like child issues or something, and that has a merge request with everything in it, but which is kind of what happens with experimental modules, for instance.
I'll suggest another concrete step, that at our next meeting, let's discuss the issue they're currently working on, the group at Acquia working on the field UI, which is to use modals in field creation flow. I'll paste it into the Zoom chat, and it's issue 3386762. And Ralph mentions in chat the current merge request on that issue is broken and impossible to apply. So I agree, and that's one reason we can't talk about it today. But I think sort of the larger region is that we haven't prepared for it. But I think by next week we should try to discuss it and provide early feedback. And I'm getting a thumbs up from Ralph. So I guess our follow-ups are one, to comment on the issue we started with, the already fixed issue of combining the two field creation forms. Second, try to have some in-person conversations about reminding people that the core gates are there. I pasted the link for the Drupal core gates into the Zoom chat. I don't know if you noticed that or not. And third, let's discuss this issue as soon as we can arrange to do so. Thanks, Aaron. That's that page for the core gates. The last one in alphabetical order is usability.
But accessibility is first, so that's good too. Well, actually, that's kind of fun, because if you follow them in that order, you fix accessibility bugs, And then like the very last thing before it's released is to do like a final usability review and make sure that there's nothing that, you know, maybe you change things in the middle here, you know, and then you want to do a final review, and maybe, you know, maybe that's actually not a bad order.
All right, we have almost 15 minutes left. And unless if we're ready, are we ready to move on to another issue?
I thought we were. I was just going to suggest, as I said, I'm more than happy to have in-person conversations with DrupalCon, and I could do a quick write up for the issue. I'm a little short on time at the moment, so maybe maybe I could post something quick into the chat and we could flesh it out on Slack or something.
Okay, thank you. So I think I'm sharing my screen now. It should show issue 2890791. Improve usability of disabled checkboxes on the module listing page. And this actually has a very descriptive issue summary. I appreciate that. Modules on the listing page can have their checkboxes disabled, and there's no messaging to the end user as to why this is occurring. And this is sort of a familiar point among this group, that disabled checkboxes are always a bad idea. Maybe I'll open this screenshot in a separate tab so it'll be larger. And this is what it has looked like. The enabled modules cannot be disabled from this page, so they have checkboxes, but they're disabled. Let me look at a live site where I'm using the merge request from this issue. All of the installed modules have been put inside this collapsed details element. If you open it up, I'm sorry, I had it opened up. If you open it up, then there is no checkbox at all. The checkbox has just been removed. Some modules may be uninstalled on the uninstall page. So that's a helpful message. You can also get there as one of the tabs on this page. And I'm not entirely sure what other changes have been made to this page. The show all columns link doesn't seem to do anything, but maybe that's because I already have a wide screen. There are no hidden columns. And then the rest of the page, I think, is unchanged. We have groups of modules, core experimental, field types, and so on. Any questions first about the problem here with the issue that it's trying to address? Go ahead, Ralph.
Could you narrow down the screen, please? Because the button you've mentioned, I also stumbled across that. And with a narrow screen, then the label of the button changes. And it becomes even more confusing than it already is.
This button, show all columns?
Yep. If you click it now.
So currently we just see the names of the modules, and if I click that, nothing happens.
Exactly. But with a wide screen, if you click it, the hide lower priority columns isn't showing up. So not on mobile, on a mobile view.
I think I noticed that too. I'm using browser tools to change the screen width. Let me try reloading the page and without changing screen width. When I click on this, it just goes away.
Yep.
I'm not sure whether that's specific to this issue or not.
The button got introduced by this issue, so
Well, there are other places where we have responsive tables, and I'm not sure whether how much that button is customized for the current page. But go ahead, Thomas.
Just a brief question. The latest versions of Drupal that this patch is being applied to, does the installed modules section does that exist in the standard? I don't recall, like the older versions that I've installed. It still kept the installed modules. I thought they were still grouped. And that's what I'm trying to understand, is whether or not the grouping of installed modules. No, it doesn't look like it was.
Did I
Okay.
close the tab with a screenshot? So this is what it looked like before. The installed
yeah.
modules were indicated by having the checkbox selected, and they were mixed in with the uninstalled modules.
So does that mean that they still had the rows that were essentially the categories? It's not showing if there was if this is still in a category. So are they extracting the installed modules, moving them to the top, and losing metadata?
That is what it looks like. So previously they
Yeah.
were in these groups, core, experimental, and so on. And when it is installed, there's no indication of which group it belongs to.
Okay, for me, that's a problem. I don't know if anyone else cares, but the loss of metadata means loss of the ability to comprehend. So it works great for whoever installs these things, works very poorly if it's a custom series of modules that aren't clearly custom, that have been installed, and you are a later user of a site.
Ralph, go ahead.
I've tested the example with Migrate Tools, which is compatible with Drupal 11, and that way it was possible. And if you install it, it gets into the whole list of installed modules, and that way, for example, you're searching for a module. And for me, usually it's difficult to find configuration pages. And for me, an easy way is I go to the extend page for the first time. If I don't know if a module has a configuration page, I go into the module extend page, then I go to the module region, for example, migration, and then search for migrate tools. And then I can open it. But in the current situation, you first have to expand installed modules, then you have manually scan down to migrate tools, then click open the description, and then click another time to get to the configuration page. That way it's cumbersome. And one other detail that has also been noted in regards of screen readers, the installed modules are missing the checkboxes. The checkboxes were the anchor focusable, and to that anchor the module name was appended. And without that, you just are able to tab through the descriptions, and also those descriptions are the only thing available in the installed module section. And that way, the whole context is missing and makes it difficult to process that way.
Are you saying that as you tab through, you never hit the title of the module?
Yep.
Interesting.
And also it isn't getting announced or is accessible via the rotor in VoiceOver, for example. So you just have the description section.
Yes,
and
I'm tabbing through it now and confirming what you're saying. I assume I can open, yes. So just to illustrate, not with Migrate Tools, but you're saying that you often use this page to find this configure link, right?
If in particular if I install a new module and I want to know if there is any configuration page for that module. That way it's easier, instead of searching the configuration and in which subsection of the configuration page the module hides its configuration.
Right. So when the page initially loads, this field this details element is closed. And if I were to search for automated cron, if I use the filter, then it expands and I do find automated cron. And
Okay.
let's see, let me force reload the page again to get to sort of a clean starting point. So the filter provides a quick way to do what you're asking for. And you can get to the configure link that way. But it would be even better if I could tab through and get to the module titles. I've always found it frustrating to find things by their group just because there are so many groups and so many groups are large, and closing the large ones and scrolling down is a bit of a pain. But Aaron, go ahead. You wanted to say something on this?
Thanks. Yeah, I remember in the past we've looked at at least one issue around this module list, and one of the, for instance, was to like have an install link for each module. Another suggestion was to like use the split button element for like the configure permissions help links. And I just don't understand this proposed solution. Like, what is it helping? Because surely if you want a list of installed modules, then to me the most sensible option would just be to provide some kind of filter that filters the existing list. And I'm not sure that like having the more or less the entire list repeated on this page is, I don't think that's necessarily a great pattern.
So for example, we already have the filter by name or description. We have this on my white screen. We have this huge unused area where we could easily put in additional filters for installed and uninstalled. We are almost out of time. Thomas, can you make a quick comment?
Very quick. Regarding my earlier concern, I would just suggest that if you could just click on any particular module, expanding the information next to it. I would suggest that they add metadata here about what group something is in, even if they're not going to make it searchable. That way, if they're going to go through with this change, you can still find what category it's under.
Okay. Yeah, that certainly is one way we could avoid losing that information. We've previously discussed this in some related issues, and I think we agreed that we should try to go by small steps, especially since the module browser is coming, and that will change all of this. But I think our consensus is that this is not the best step to be taking at this time. Ralph, say something really quick.
Yeah, just quick. Already added it to the chat, but I think Aaron's idea is quite good. If you just add a filter, a select field, installed or not installed, next to the filter, then you still keep the groups underneath, and it would be way more clear from my perspective, in case you want to see what is installed and what is not.
Right. I guess the one point that this current issue does fix is the usability concerns with disabled checkboxes, but it seems to introduce a lot of other problems while trying to address that. So let's wrap it there because we are at the hour, and I know we all have other work we have to get to. So thank you all for taking the hour to discuss usability issues. Let's try to follow up on these, and we'll be back next week.
Okay,
You
thanks.
have a nice weekend.
Yeah, thanks. Nice weekend.